Hello everybody, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Serrated Cucumber, and in today's video, I thought we'd get a bit nostalgic and look over some of the best and worst Life is Strange 2 episodes, and what exactly made them my favourites, or least favourites. It's that, or make an updated version of all evidence Sean Diaz is a furry, and I'm sure you'll all be grateful that I've saved you from part 2 of that monstrosity. Now of course, there's going to be some disagreement over this in the comments and all, which is okay. Have some discussion down there about which episodes you prefer and why. I've always found that in Life is Strange 2, one of my favourite parts of the episodes is that they're all so unique and different from one another in storytelling, scenery, colour palette, themes, and yet they're underpinned by this central story and theme of brotherhood and love. And since there's no predicting to do until Life is Strange 3 or until Tell Me Why finally gets some new information before it releases, I figured that this was a nice video to fill that interim period. Here are my favourite and least favourite episodes. Similarly to my video on the endings, I'll be grouping them on personal opinion from least favourite to favourite, so let's go. Bearing in mind that there will be major plot spoilers, yeah, you've heard me say it a million times before, so let's do this. You know there's going to be spoilers, you clicked on the thing, so let's do the thing. However, before we begin, I'd like to mention something. I'm not editing this video, a very good friend of mine is, Florian. He actually runs his own YouTube channel called Games Dissect, a channel said to be based around gaming in the near future, and is interested in a series of collaborations on my channel soon. Trust me, if you like my content, you will love some of the plans he has coming up for his own channel. I can't wait. We're both huge fans of Life is Strange and story games in general. Flo has graciously provided his services in both recording in sharp, shiny 1440p quality, so crank up that resolution and enjoy the beauty, and he has lent his editing skills to the task of this video. I'll leave a link to his channel in the description, and be sure to show him lots of love, both on this video and on his own channel too. With that out of the way, let's go.
What's happening?
It may surprise you to know that my least favourite episode in the entire series was the introduction to this whole journey, but episode 1 just did not click with me the way the others did. Here's why. Episode 1 got off to a really strong start, the charming Lila making her debut for fans to fawn over for the next 4 episodes and to be awarded a phone call, 2 mentions and an appearance in 1 ending. Yay. We're introduced to a Life is Strange familiarity, a golden evening amongst a comforting location. As Life is Strange scenes go, this is a staple, and it's very welcome. The introduction to Sean's family in his Skype session with Lila was incredibly sweet, yet at Esteban's death, things begin to fall apart. The scene is emotionally intense, sure, but I felt a very weak emotion when seeing Esteban die. Perhaps it's due to the fact that the Life is Strange team released Esteban's death ages prior to the game's release, and so it wasn't a surprise, but for me, the emotional reaction was slightly stunted by the confusion and chaos of the scene. It wasn't until episode 2 that the mention of his photo that I felt genuinely mournful for Esteban, as I felt that the episode neglects the theme slightly in favour of the survival element of episode 1, a central theme which is explored well, but could have done with more laps for grieving about Esteban. The Into the Woods section showcases Dontnod's new power over their engine, relevant to higher hardware and greater graphics. It was breathtaking, yet I felt the scene dragged for a very long time, and it felt more menial than anything. The gameplay segments of Life is Strange are often the least fun to me, and I often prefer the dialogue and intense choices. Speaking of choice, it's a thing that episode 1 does extremely well, with plenty of opportunity to shape Daniel's moral stance very early in the game, and with its own V-Slice introduction into consequence of morality through the choice to steal Hank's camping gear, and the subsequent consequence of Daniel stealing from Brody. Lila's phone call also felt like a good choice to make, to leave your best friend worrying or to call her at the expense of being tracked. Minor choices such as stealing the Choco Crisp and shoplifting were also very good, and I like the subtly different remarks Doris Stamper would make to Sean, depending on whether he was dirty or not in the gas station. Atmospherically, episode 1 is amazing. It really immerses you into Sean's world. I particularly like the scene in Brody's car where the glow of his dashboard contrasted against the dark forest. It was a semblance of security for Sean. Episode 1 is largely characterised by earthy colours with lots of cinematography in which highlights chiaroscuro, as Mr. Jefferson would say. The contrast of lights and darks, sunlight against pine trees, Hank's neon sign against the stormy night, the warm illumination of the motel room contrasted with the dark sea outside, it's all very contrasting and very beautiful. Things like the swishing of trees in the breeze, the rays of light penetrating the canopies of the forest, it's all quite encompassing in the universe, and it's very pretty to look at. In terms of music, episode 1 excels, with 4 exceptional licensed tracks which have become iconic, and many introductions to the developing OST of the game. Episode 1's music is the first in a series of growth, and my personal favourite was No Woman, although seeing things such as On the Flip of a Coin as a relation to Sean's life in a city was very cool. I have been harsh on episode 1 here, but honestly, I loved it so much. It's a great introduction, magical even, it just wasn't quite as consistent as some of the others. It felt like a lot of filler amongst an episode of great moments. Some segments were very long gameplay-wise, and it would have done better to relish in these moments more. For example, having a finishing segment to the motel scene. Episode 1 also didn't feel like it developed the characters much at all beyond Esteban's death. The entire of the episode felt like true loss. And while I guess that's the point, it would have been nice to see Sean building a bit of something. Resilience, understanding of the elements of Daniel. Number 4. Rules.
Man, I think I see why Mom left now. She couldn't put up with your stupid rules anymore.
I know, it seems like I'm just going in a pattern here, but I swear I'm not just going in ascending order. Episode 2 was a winter wonderland, host to the small town of Beaver Creek, Oregon, where alcoholic fathers and controlling grandparents alike revel in their winter celebrations leading up to the 25th. Episode 2 has this magical feel about it. Maybe it's because I'm a thirsty bitch for nostalgia, but I've always loved heavy snow settings, and it's the coziness associated being inside on winter days. Obviously, since I live in the UK, all we get during the winter is piss loads of rain and regional depression, but it's nice to imagine that white Christmas winter wonderland, and episode 2 is what this illustrates. Two lost brothers rekindling with their roots and attempting to enjoy themselves in spite of all odds. Of course, things are never perfect and they must move on, but this momentary lapse is warming and comforting. Episode 2 is best played with a hot chocolate on your desk, with the curtains shut, and maybe a packet of tissues depending on how much of a liar your Daniel is. Episode 2 starts off strong in terms of setting. The abandoned cabin feels like Sean and Daniel's attempt at having a bit of normality against all the cold. It feels very destitute and serene, and the isolation of the woods is very apparent. There is nobody for miles. The training section with Daniel was an interesting way to keep the player up to speed with its telekinesis, and Mushroom is so cute. Look at her puppy before she dies in 10 minutes. I do have one gripe about this segment, however, and it's that playing pranks on Daniel, meaning that Brotherhood is potentially negatively affected, just seems dumb to me. Brotherhood actually has consequence, for example in episode 4, and it bothers me that Daniel takes it so personally. He's fine to prank Sean all he wants, and I think it's all in jest in high spirits, but clearly Daniel doesn't think so. What's he gonna say when he refuses to let go of Lisbeth in episode 4? Oh, I'm sorry Sean, I don't trust your judgment. Remember when you threw a snowball at me last December? How could I listen to you after that? I have to kill her, she deserves it. Mind you that this is more of a flaw with the game as a whole, and perhaps episode 2 shouldn't be harshly penalised for it. Some small interactions at the start of episode 2 were very cute and done well. I like the shit Captain Crew game that you could play, and wish it made an appearances in episode 3 and 5 too. Daniel's reaction to Esteban's photo was equal parts touching and realistic. I enjoyed their tired chatter, and Sean smoking on the porch was a very sweet intro. However, what I didn't like was Mushroom's death. Obviously from a story perspective it was sad and I'm naturally going to dislike it, but it also felt like Mushroom's death reinforced the early idea of the game being considered tragedy porn, and served only as a demonstration of Daniel unleashing his powers on the cougar. She died 2 scenes after we had gotten her in terms of the story. Obviously it felt as if we'd known her for longer, but I felt very little when Mushroom died because it was so sudden yet so expected. I wish they'd left it a bit longer, perhaps had her stay with the Reynolds and give us the choice of leaving it behind, or trying to take her along for the ride, which would only result in her untimely death once again. Obviously, this is my natural instinct to imagine a better world for the Diaz brothers, but I just felt like Mushroom's death was quickly thrown in tragedy. Rest in peace, puppy. This flaw aside, the walk to the Reynolds home with Red by Mount Wolf playing in the background was by far one of my favourite segments in the game. It was so atmospheric and fitting for the rest of the game. Kind of sad in a way as Sean and Daniel begin to accept their lives and to disappear into the backwoods and other hidden areas to live as fugitives. The Reynolds house stuck personally with me, and the atmosphere of the boys stumbling on the place at night was absolutely beautiful. The home felt like a cosy respite on what had been a cold, unforgiving journey so far. It felt so warm and comforting, and a place of familiarity for Sean and Daniel. Their talk addressing the powers in the bedroom was nice, and everything was going swimmingly with a comforting breakfast, obviously the drama around Karen's room. However, all was not perfect. The trouble with episode 2 begins with Chris Erickson's introduction, something which felt underwhelming and disillusioning. Don't forget that 4 months leading up to the episode's release we had been expecting some resolve with Chris. Instead, we got barely any mention of him. The Captain Spirit storyline felt super duper sidelines in terms of the plot of episode 2, and honestly, a bunch of the starting stuff, including Mushroom's burial, could have been converted into something to wrap up the Captain Spirit storyline at least a little better. Obviously, this improves in later episodes and we get to see Chris all grown up in the high morality endings, but still, it feels like it's cut short. And I guess to a certain degree it's meant to feel like they're untimely ripped from the safe place, but I don't know. Chris's voice actor having aged a bit didn't sit too well either, and honestly the Captain Spirit content was a little underwhelming in terms of the setup it had. I will say that the resolve of Karen's room was an interesting plot string and gave episode 2 a real purpose. I liked the confrontation between Sean and Claire and the subsequent 3 ways the story could go. I know in the end it's a little irrelevant, but getting Chris hit by the car is a good way to reinforce the idea of honesty, a theme which is pushed throughout the game. The other 2 endings can seem a little underwhelming by comparison, and episode 2 is generally a pretty calm episode, but you can't help but love some of the Christmas spirit it brings and some of the joy felt throughout the episode seeing Daniel genuinely happy in over a month. It's just nice. Oh yeah, I forgot. These 2 lovable fucks. The introduction to Cassidy and Finn felt exciting and enthralling. They both seemed to hide so much mystery behind them, and while I'd known that there would be drifters in the game sometime before episode 2's release, it had never occurred to me how much I'd be excited to spend more time with them in the coming episodes. Overall, episode 2 was a good episode, just lacking a bit in the Captain Spirit storyline and didn't have as much action as it maybe could have. Number 3. Faith.
I'll come right back. Again and again.
We hear that word a lot, but what is faith? Faith is the 4th installment of Life is Strange 2 and is an episode to be commended and praised for what it is. Faith is a phenomenal episode, playing host to some of the most powerful emotional moments in the Life is Strange series to date. Faith characterizes Sean's determination, it's his rock bottom, and does an amazing deal at showcasing that. From his coma to leaving Haven Point, Sean's determination is not lost once within the episode, and he powers through all unforgiving odds. Faith has a slow start at the hospital and introduced us to the jovial Joey, and while I don't have a cool nickname for her, Agent Flores, the young FBI agent assigned to Sean Diaz's case. I liked her conflict between seeming to genuinely care for Sean's case and a desire to do her job properly, yet I felt that this could have been a bit more explicit. Many hated Flores to begin with, and I don't think her character is actually intended to be hated. I think she's meant to be understood. She's trying to help Sean, but she doesn't come off as very believable when she states that. She seems that she's a liar who's interrogating him. I wish her conversation with him was more fleshed out so she could show she cares a little more. It felt like her genuinely speaking to Sean was incredibly short-lived and she only wanted to get information out of him. It might have been better otherwise, and many more fans would have interpreted her character perhaps how she was meant to be. The hospital is a gilded cage and does a good job at showing this. I love the subsequent chat with Finn. It was heartwarming that the developers had cared enough about our desire to see more of Cassidy and Finn so that they included more mentions in episode 4 and 5, and even an appearance from our favourite boy with dreads. It was a short goodbye, but a nice one at that. I love the revamped Long Road Ahead theme, as I love most montages in Life is Strange, and I have to say that I found myself particularly repulsed and frightened at Chad's racism when Sean is pulled out of his car in the desert. With the pathetic fallacy of a storm brewing, the cold, unforgiving colour scheme, Sean's torment characterised through wounds and tears, it's really powerful stuff, and despite what some may say when trying to deny the racism that goes on within the Life is Strange universe, it's reflective of what takes place in the real world. People like Chad certainly exist, and they do that type of stuff because it's fun to them. It's a disgusting reflection on society, and I have to admire Dontnod's confidence to push something as awful as that in their game to showcase the reality of racist attacks. It was brutal and raw, and I loved it. Obviously, the church scenes with Daniel can feel so grave and hopeless, but there is again some respite with Karen as the two share a cigarette, one of my favourite moments of the game. The hot tiles underneath Sean's feet, the roach motel had been in the middle of nowhere, a feeling of serenity and calm, feeling like Sean can relate to Karen, their broken relationship slowly touching again, and then being reminded of each other. It's a moment that felt drawn out and long and full of stuff fans had been dying to know. I absolutely love this segment, it's one of the best in the game. And again followed by another best with the really shocking reveal of Jacob's sexuality and the grief it had caused him at Haven Point, the moment Sean had shared with him in Elizabeth's house. It's all incredibly touching. The following church scene is agonising to watch. It's brutal, real, raw. There's something about seeing Sean knocked down and getting back up each time that's empowering. Daniel's conversion being undone is strong and believable, and Karen's statement about accidents, injustice and pain is inspiring and moving. Lisbeth is detestable in the best way, but I discussed this in detail in my 40-minute analysis of episode 4, which you can go and watch but after this video. The ending is also beautiful and cathartic with an air of finality and consensus about it. Episode 4 really is a beautiful episode from start to finish with the colour palette and desert settings, as are most of them, but still my point stands that it's incredibly picturesque. There's something so satisfying about watching the church burn to the ground. One issue I did have by the time the episode had finished is that it was easy for me to justify killing Lisbeth in my initial playthrough because of her two-dimensional nature. Dontnod have spoken about how they would like to have developed Lisbeth further as a villain and showed her genuine concern for her church, yet aside from Jacob saying this, I didn't really buy it enough. There wasn't enough genuine proof and I felt nothing for her really. It would have been nice to see her more fleshed out, but obviously there are budget restrictions. The consequence of teaching Daniel feeding into the endings was also something that is noteworthy. He will react differently to Lisbeth depending on how you've raised him, which is just a great use of the game's expanded choice and consequence mechanic, which just overall improves quality and discussion of episodes. A minor gripe that I had with the episode, however, was the lack of licensed tracks. Episode 4 did a great job with the OST, and the one licensed track they picked for the ending was great, but overall it would have been nice to have at least one more song, perhaps in a montage. Just a minor complaint which doesn't infringe too much on the quality of the episode, but still something worth mentioning as to why this episode might not be higher. Bear in mind though, this is a combination of reasons. I'm not just hating on the episode because it didn't have more tracks. Overall, episode 4 is quite different from the rest of the series. It's more focused on Sean than Daniel despite the objectives of the plot, and I love it. It's great, and right in the middle in terms of how much I enjoyed playing it. I will say that it was very closely tied to my next choice, which brings me on to it. Number 2. Wolves.
Yeah, I love you too.
I love Wolves. It's not without its problems, but it's a phenomenal episode. My main gripe with Wolves is that it's so much shorter than other episodes. While I found myself easily able to spend 4 hours on each episode, I was hard pressed to squeeze 2 hours out of Wolves, and that's with exhausting every dialogue option, finding most of the collectibles, taking time to make choices, etc. I get why. Life is Strange's last episodes have always been characterised, at least in part, by their poor finales, and this is where Wolves differs. It may compromise on length, but it does not spare any quality, unlike Polarised and Hell is Empty. Some budget deficiencies are evident, however it's nowhere near the shamble that was Before the Storm's finale. Everything in the episode felt necessary and wanted, and there was no filler where I thought realistically we'd be better off without this. And it was one of the most consistent episodes overall for how engaged I was with it. A friend told me once before I played episode 5 that it was like a love letter to the fans, and honestly, I felt this all the way through. Episode 5 starts us to possibly one of the most captivating and beautiful bits of scenery ever in the games, the Grand Canyon. The brothers have meaningful discussion about criminality, and it's clear that Sean is no longer the distant brother he once was. He and Daniel are, for lack of better words, twit and twat. They're two peas in a pod, and it feels like all of the suffering and crap they went through together was worth something. They're bonded more than ever before, and their relationship has stood the test of time and faith. And for the first time, it feels like they're genuinely able to enjoy each other's company and do things which make them happy. I like the addressing of Daniel's potential post-traumatic stress disorder over Lisbeth, and the talk over whether they're criminals. The differences between a high and a morality low playthrough, it's stark, and I feel like they really nailed the choice and consequence over how Daniel behaves, and even how some of the other characters address him, such as Karen calling Daniel evil playfully. Little does she know, he's about to annihilate a border crossing, but we'll call it a fun mother-son bonding quirk. I like the segment of Away. The place is full of personality, and it's a very Life is Strange place if you know what I mean. The silent serenity of the desert is perfect, and it makes me want to go out and live in a desert in the middle of nowhere. I liked all the letters from the Drifters, although I'm unsure of how they got the Reynolds-Diaz address at all. Karen continues to sport amazing voice acting and a huge personality, while Stanley, Arthur and Joanne didn't have nearly the amount of content to make them truly care for their characters. I found myself immediately drawn to David. I liked how Dontnod addressed David, a character despised by many for obvious reasons. Personally, I believe that by the end of Life is Strange Season 1, David had genuinely recognised the fault in his ways and wanted to change for the better. It made me happy to see that he and Chloe had a healthy relationship in my game. Despite Chloe losing both of her parents and David his wife, they could reconcile and look past their differences, making peace and supporting one another. He was shown to still have a tough exterior, his character has not done a total 180, yet he provides a voice of reason for Sean seeking help under the law, a foil to Karen, who urges them to cross the border no matter what it takes. It's an interesting juxtaposition, but sorry David, I'll plough through hundreds of innocent people to get Sean and Daniel to Mexico. So, we arrive at the border, with a frighteningly powerful use of Daniel's powers to bend metal. While Dontnod seems to have overestimated Trump's ability to construct the wall in a year, it's still not close to being done in 2020, it's shocking and very symbolic for Daniel Diaz, a Mexican-American child, to break open the barrier between nations and pierce the border. Daniel being shot was very scary and sudden, but it also didn't scare me that much, given that I knew he could survive a gunshot wound to the arm. I was perhaps not as worried as I should have been. It might have been more impactful if he had perhaps been other than grazed, but I get that they can't show extreme gore or a child being shot in the leg or something. Madison and Luke made my skin crawl. The father-daughter racism duo. They epitomise the bigoted spread of Trump's administration in the South, and I can't help but hate them. The discussion in the police station, attitude towards Diego, I had absolutely no issue with asking Daniel to take revenge on them. They are not the type of people who benefit from civil discussion. The fact that Don't Nod could make me hate a pair of characters so much is reason enough for me to applaud them. Of course, we praise Life is Strange for the highs, the kiss with Finn, swimming with Cassidy, DANCE, etc., but there's also seriously something to be applauded in their ability to invoke anger and detest for somebody and their actions. The breakout of prison scene is incredibly interesting in that it can either be summed up as pacifistic and the Diaz brothers fleeing, or a murder scene where Daniel goes ballistic and kills everybody. Though I have issue with this in regard to the officers have now seen Daniel's power and it's not addressed in any of the endings, it is something I can overlook because holy god it's good for them to both have some power over the police for once in their lives. I enjoyed this segment despite feeling panicked, though from a gameplay perspective I wished freeing Carla and Diego was presented as an option immediately rather than locked behind dialogue you need to sit through, which most people do not stop for as they're worried about the consequences of failing. While I didn't encounter any bugs, I've known for people to take issue with police officers becoming invisible in the scene where they advance on Sean and he must choose what to use Daniel's powers for, whether that be killing, trapping, or otherwise incapacitating. And finally, the border and the subsequent endings, the true highlight of episode 5. This is Sean and Daniel's moment, death or dignity. The intense pressure I felt from playing this in my first Parting Ways ending was immense. The talk in the car was beautiful with amazing voice acting, which is now BAFTA award winning, and the ending choice felt incredibly realistic and tense. There was no degree of force, it felt as if things were naturally always going to align this way. I pondered for ages on my final choice, to surrender and undo a year's worth of travel and risk going to prison or to make it out. I saw the gates in front of me and I had no choice but to make the death-defying decision to ask Daniel to use his powers to get us across. Of course he subsequently refused and panicked, screaming to myself as he jumped out of the car, but the border scene was so well made. I was in tears watching them roll up to the border, let alone when they were speaking to one another and promising the other that it was going to be alright. It was visceral and emotional in the best kind of way, plucking at my heartstrings like I was under full control of Don't Nod's sadistic storytelling. The culmination and coalescence of everything Sean has taught Daniel played out beautifully in each of the 4 endings. I'll repeat myself again, there are 4, not 7. And each of the endings are symbolic of something. Their bond, Daniel's independence, Sean's truth to himself, or the willingness to grow on and carry on irrespective of each other. Despite not being a sacrifice choice, each of the endings does invoke a sacrifice for the Diaz brothers, and it's beautifully written. Enough canon information is given about their lives after the border to where it feels totally separate to season 1 where Max and Chloe simply drove off into the sunset. The time skips post-episode were some of my favourite things, and to see Sean and Daniel in the future was something that was incredibly heartbreaking for me. It's like being a parent. We spent a year with these brothers, and especially in Redemption to see them both as functioning adults, it was incredibly alienating and weird, but in a good way. It nails home this inherent recognition of their autonomy as people, and their lives beyond the story. However, in equal measure, enough is left up to interpretation to the point where headcanons can be made, fanfiction can be written, and theories can be proposed to the community. In our Life is Strange Discord server, which you should totally join, we've been speaking about the endings for months on end, and we haven't gotten bored of them yet. There's so much to discuss in each of the 4, and despite my grievances about wanting a tiered redemption ending, I have to say that I really felt like Don't Nod hit the finale out of the park. I will say, however, that the lack of licensed music at all in episode 5 was extremely disappointing to me, and for that, I can't regard it as highly. I recognise the budget was likely running short, but I mean, would it have killed them to save a bit of budget? Episode 2 had 4 licensed tracks for God's sake, and episode 5 has 0? Which brings me on to the first, I don't know, Wastelands.
I'm not a kid anymore.
Have you ever wanted to sleep beneath a canopy of beautiful redwoods in the middle of the Emerald Triangle, the smell of pot permeating your nostrils at every corner, chilling with large men who have a facial structure scarily similar to Agent 47, and girls and boys alike who look like they need checking for lice? Then look no further, my budding trimmigrants, to Humboldt County, California. With the most diverse, interesting set of characters the game has ever had to offer, join your fellow trimmigrants for the benefits of nomad life, such as head lice, hygiene issues, group therapy, child abuse, explorative sexuality, and finally, watching your little brother get shot because he wanted to steal from a drug dealer. All jokes aside, I dare say that episode 3 is a fan favourite. For many reasons, really, most of which do not include aforementioned head lice. Episode 3 immediately showcases the enhanced capability of Life is Strange 2's Unreal Engine in its showcase of the gorgeous scenery. The pink and orange sun filters perfectly through the deep forest, bringing on a fresh, deep, warm feel of spring to summer. Come to think of it, the entirety of the episode feels like a summer camp experience, if summer camp involved guns and trimming weed. Maybe it does in the USA. So we begin as Sean with his not-so-fresh mane of hair in the fresh new world of California. Obligatory reading of the diary past us, we emerge to the carefree life with Hannah's entire bosom on full display. To me, this kind of felt like Dontnod was just expressing that they could do this with the age ratings, but it also served as an instant introduction to the carefree way of life the Drifters employ. They simply do not care. As a juxtaposition, Sean, Jacob, Anders and Ingrid stand out like sore thumbs when compared to the colourful Cassidy, Finn, Hannah and Penny, who we'll get onto later. The first few scenes do an amazing job of filling in the gaps in the time skip, Daniel's trauma obviously hitting him at full swing now that some time has passed a reflection and his 9-year-old brain has become disillusioned with his living situation. Adventuring is no longer fun, he just wants to go home and have a normal life. Sean can no longer convince him on things, Daniel makes his own choices due to inherently poor upbringing over the past couple of months. While I hate this is out of our control, Sean is only a teenager and can only do so much. Sure, he neglects Daniel on the farm a lot when we as the player might feel disconnected from this, but realistically, he's a teenager, not super nanny. Our introduction to Penny and Hannah are great, and of course we need no introduction to Cassidy as she was already prominent in episode 2. We do, however, find ourselves able to throw knives with Finn, and it's blatant from the start that Daniel is a brat. Daniel behaves frustratingly throughout the entirety of episode 3, many find themselves easily angered at his behavioural dips, and I'd like to address this for a moment before continuing, as I think it's pretty important to the whole episode, and a reason as why many do not consider episode 3 in as high regard. First, I'd like to start off by saying that if we didn't have episode 3 Daniel, episode 5 Daniel would not contrast and shine as much. Episode 3 really is a peak of sorts in terms of the journey's issues, especially with regard to the relationship of the Wolf brothers. Secondly, it's a perfectly justifiable explanation that Daniel is traumatized by the past few months and is acting out given that he has no home, no solid parental figure, and no idea where he stands with his powers and being considered an adult. And neither does Sean. Sean treats Daniel as a child, yet there is the argument to be made that he should treat him more maturely and give him some more agency and trust of his own given the power. I personally do not fault the episode for this and believe that episode 3 would only be half of the episode it is now without Daniel's bratty nature. Moving on. The exposition of the dynamic of the Trimmigrants was fantastic, and I felt myself allured to each character. Even the tiny details of Anders and Ingrid and their arguments between Canada and Texas had me hooked. Not to mention Jinx, Hannah's family, Cassidy's family, and Finn's family. The stories of all of the Drifters were extremely fascinating, and learning how they interacted as such through the trimming sessions was really entertaining despite the somewhat dull gameplay. Even though I was pretty amazing at trimming those buds, if I do say so myself, I earned that fucking paycheck. The campfire scene is quite possibly one of the most beautiful and serenic scenes throughout the entire game, a moment of calm, not in the literal sense, but for what it is. The scene is incredibly calming as the Drifters discuss their traumas and pain of the past, the heavy load they carry upon their backs. Sarah Bartholomew's rendition of I'm Willing put me at a lot of ease. She's a great singer and captures Cassidy's spirit perfectly, and I kinda think she deserved that Grammy. Now, I didn't stay up late for the chat about sexuality, but that's a very interesting choice which leads to some very interesting dialogues. Sean's confusion and naivety about his sexuality is immensely relatable. As the Drifters coax Sean's more relaxed side out of him, we see Sean comfortably chilling among friends for the first time since the walk home with Lila. Although that haircut is pretty tragic. If you choose to go to bed with Daniel, there is also some interesting dialogue about his anger management and his powers, and it feels like whatever option you choose, you're opting for a part of Sean's life which he cares about, and both scenes are pretty lovely. Now, DANCE. One of the most unexpected, weird, uncanny things put into Life is Strange, ever. I did not expect this song, so much so that I actually tapped out of the game to make sure it wasn't an alarm or a Spotify playing. It showcases the daily grind for the Drifters, the passage of time in such an amazing way. After the month before, Sean is at a high point, loving life and having fun for the first time in months since the incident in Seattle. The song encapsulates this sensation of working despite all the odds and earning money, contributing their bit and having fun while doing it, and it truly fits the vibe of the camp. The scenes building up to the ending of episode 3 are the truly impactful moments to me. The kiss swimming under a moonlight with Cassidy, the tattoo, I won't mention the tent scene. Finn's heist idea presents a truly dynamic way that choice and consequence varies within the endings, and you know I'm a sucker for those. In equal measure, Finn's romance story is one of forgiveness and a mutual love and respect, and I love it to death. The heist feels dangerous, filled to the brim with choices. I mean, how many different endings are there? Like 16? More? Obviously they're all composed of small variations, such as Big Joe being present or not, Finn dying, Daniel being shot, etc. But it's enough to make you really feel like your actions have weight behind them. Natalie at the end made me cry. I interpreted it as Sean apologising to Daniel for getting him hurt. After the white hot burning of Meryl's living room, the gunshots fired, the power usage, it was all incredibly scary and well done. It made me feel emotional in the best way. Wastelands plays host to the most consistent episode of Life is Strange 2 in terms of action and quiet, and the enjoyment of both respectively. It sports very few weak points in my opinion, and is a high point on a series of continuous high points. The characters are captivating in every sense of the word, and I would kill for a Drifters DLC. But that's likely a topic for another video. Even episode 3's trailer was absolutely mind-blowing, and it captures the zeitgeist perfectly. Look at me using my fancy words. So, to conclude, here are my ratings for each episode. Roads gets a 7 out of 10, a weak start comparatively, but nonetheless a good episode. Rules gets an 8 out of 10, a tragic drop of the Captain Spirit storyline, yet overall a really good episode regardless. Faith is easily an 8.8 out of 10, not entirely consistent, I wasn't absolutely hooked at all times, but a beautiful episode both in the quieter moments and the action of the church. Wolves weighs in easily at a 9 out of 10, a phenomenal episode by the time it shows itself, but could do with being longer and having more licensed tracks, and tiered redemption. I'll never stop raving about that idea. Wastelands, I can say I safely give it a 10 out of 10. It encapsulates what I would define as a perfect episode of Life is Strange. Consistent and engaging at every corner, packed with moments which immerse you into the universe, some ties to the storytelling, settings and themes of Season 1, with the inclusion of 2 romance options, which still have me undecided on which one I like better. In spite of their lice, Cassidy and Finn are both lovable to the moon and back. And so, I rest my case. What do you guys think of my rankings? I know this episode is a teeny tiny bit longer than my usual ones, but I really hope you enjoyed. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, and once again be sure to go and check out the Games Dissect channel, which will be linked in the description. Be sure to give Flo some love in the comments and stay tuned for his upcoming narrative game content. But as always, remember to keep your cucumbers serrated and have a nice day. Bye guys!